I thought I'd make a video. Someone wanted to see biblical exegesis, a video on biblical exegesis. And so I have this old cabinet that was in the house when we moved here that I put in books that I bought when I was in seminary that I would use if I was doing biblical exegesis. Now what biblical exegesis is, for example, let me see here. Okay, here's two books. You have Old Testament exegesis, a primer for students and pastors by Douglas Stewart. And then you have New Testament exegesis, a handbook for students and pastors by Gordon F. Fee. And so when you do exegesis, you look at, for example, you look at the Greek New Testament. Now this Greek New Testament I bought almost 50 years ago in Oakland, California. I bought it at a used bookstore in downtown Oakland, and I've had it. It has an Englishman's Greek New Testament, the Greek text of the Stevens 1550 edition, an interlinear literal translation. So what you have now, as you all know, that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and then the New Testament was written in New Testament Greek. At the time of Jesus, the language of civilization was Greek, going back Alexander the Great. And so the New Testament was written in New Testament Greek. And this one I bought almost 50 years ago. You have the Greek, of course you have the New Testament, you have the Gospel of Matthew, and then as you look through it, it has underneath the Greek a literal English translation of it. So that's what this is. It's a new Greek New Testament, and it has an interlinear literal translation of the authorized version of 1611. So that's, but you can also have, now you use these when these are textbooks in seminary. And when you do exegesis, you look at the text either in Hebrew or Greek, and then you translate it. You're supposed to know Greek and Hebrew. For example, here's my Greek vocabulary cards. Now I have to be honest with you, I could not learn New Testament Greek. I failed it. I took it many times, failed it. And when the seminary I went to, Reformed Theological Seminary, had a clause that you did not have to pass Greek or Hebrew in order to get a degree. Now I have a master, I have a, what is it called? I have a Master's of Divinity diploma. I don't have a Master's of degree. What's it called? A Master's. Oh, I can't remember what it's called now. A degree of, I can't remember what I have. My mind was completely blank. Anyway, I have a Master's diploma, not a Master's of Divinity diploma. I do not have a Master's of Divinity degree because I did not take Greek or Hebrew. See, here's the Hebrew column. So when you do exegesis, if you are really smart, now most men who graduate from seminary, they forget their Hebrew and Greek unless they stay with it. And now I've known ministers over the years who stay up with their Greek and Hebrew, and some forget. And so if you were to be a minister and you were to preach from the gospel of one of the Gospels or Pauline epistles, you would look at the Greek and then you would translate it. And then once you got a translation of it, then you would start working on the sermon. What's the main idea of the text? What is the text? What is its literal meaning, for example? And then as you look at the text and you divide it, and then you come up with a sermon subject matter. Maybe the text is on the love of God, and one of Paul's epistles. So, but when I was in seminary, I realized that the best way I could learn, what I would do in exegesis is have as many commentaries on the Old Testament and as many commentaries on the New Testament, and I would do word studies. Now, for example, I have in here, here's a word study. This is, what's this one? This is an exegetical dictionary of the New Testament. So it has every single word in the New Testament, and it gives you a definition. It translates the word for you and what it means. I have, see here's, this is volume 1, Exegetical Dictionary of the New Testament, volume 1, and it's put out by, edited by Holst Blatz and Gerard Schneider. This is volume 1, and then you have volume 2, Exegetical Dictionary of the New Testament. So you go through every single word in the New Testament, and it translates it for you, and then gives you the meaning of it. And then you have, this is volume 3 of Exegetical Dictionary. This is volume 3. So you have things like this, and then you have a concordance of the Greek New Testament by Moulton, Giddon, and Moulton. And what this is, every single word in the New Testament is put in alphabetical order, and it tells you where it's at in the New Testament, where it's used different. So you have accordance of the Greek New Testament, and then you have, let me see what else. I have here a plain New Testament Greek. It has no translation. It's just the Greek text, the New Testament Greek text. I also have a Hebrew Bible in the original Hebrew. That's the original Hebrew. This is the Old Testament, the Biblical Hebraic. It's very famous. This is the Hebrew Old Testament Bible. Of course, you know it starts in the back. You have that, and then you have, I also have an interlinear Hebrew English Old Testament. So what this is volume 1, Genesis to Deuteronomy. So it has the Hebrew text of Genesis through Deuteronomy, and it has the Hebrew above, and below it is the translation of the Hebrew. So it's an interlinear. So you can read this. Now I can't read Hebrew, but below the Hebrew is an English translation. So if you do exegesis of the book of Genesis, you look at chapter 1 of Genesis, and it gives you the Hebrew, and then below it, it gives you a literal translation. For example, it says, well, I can't read the Hebrew, but it says, chapter 1 of Genesis, verse 1, the earth and the heavens God He created in beginning. Verse 2, surfaced over in darkness and empty, formless she was, now the earth. And then it has here, in the margins, the text, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And this is 4 volumes. You have here volume 2, Interlinear Hebrew English Old Testament, volume 3, Chronicles through Song of Solomon. And then you have volume 4, Isaiah through Malachi, volume 4, the NIV, Interlinear Hebrew English Old Testament, edited by John R. Kruckenberger III. So then you have that. Also, I have in here I have my sermon, my syllabus for my Old Testament class, handbook for biblical studies, content, introduction, Old Testament, New Testament, procedure for Old Testament exposition. And then it has procedure for New Testament exposition, study guide, things like that I have. And then I have here, what's this one? Then I have here index to Brown, Driver, and Briggs Hebrew Lexicon. And that is Briggs is this thing here. This is the new Brown, Driver, Briggs Genesis Hebrew, Arabic, English lexicon. So once again, it tells you every Hebrew word and where it's found in the Hebrew Bible, and explains to you the word and its meaning and its root, and its so this goes with it. Index to Brown, Drivers, Briggs Hebrews Lexicon, complied by Bruce Insporter. I can't pronounce his name. So it has all the Hebrew words you can look up. And then I have here Wingman's Englishman's Hebrew Chaldee Concordance of Old Testament, numerically coded to Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. I also have for exegesis theological word book of the Old Testament. So it gives you the theology of a word, Old Testament biblical theology of the word. And this theology word book, this is what you would use in Old Testament exegesis, for example. It's just a 2-volume thing. I also have an NIV exhaustive concordance, which tells you every single word in the Bible, and you can look it up and where it's found throughout the Old and New Testament. NIV is a New International Version translation. What else I have here? I have a theological word book of the Bible, 230 articles bringing the resources of modern scholarship to bear on the meaning of the key words of the Bible from abomination to zeal, edited by Alan Richardson. And I have for exegesis an analytical Greek lexicon revised. This is a Greek English lexicon of the New Testament and early Christian literature. This is by Walter Bauer. See, this is what this is. These are kind of books that you would use to do Old Testament and New Testament exegesis, looking at the Hebrew, the Old Testament Hebrew, the New Testament Greek. You would have all these books to do word studies, look at the meaning of the words and things like that. And then you have, what else here? Handbook of Biblical Criticism, expanded second edition by Richard N. Solon. I have a manual grammar of Greek New Testament by H.H. Danny. A manual. This is like looking at, if you wanted to learn New Testament Greek, this is the grammar for it. The Art of Biblical Narrative. The Bible is a narrative. This gives you how the Bible is a narrative, between narratives and dialogues, biblical type scenes and use of convention, sacred history, the beginning of the prose fiction, very famous book by Walter Alter. What else do I have here? I have, this is the Book of Common Worship. I would take this when I would be preaching. When I was in seminary, I had to supply pulpits for small country churches in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. And I would use this. And so this thing's going to fall over. Let me see what else I have here. This from my grandchildren. One thing it's good to have, a minister should have as many translations of the Bible as possible. You have the King James Version, you have the NIV, New International Version, then you have the New English Bible, you have the Layman's Parallel Bible. This is the King James Version, the Modern Language Bible, the Living Bible, Revised Standard. And then I have the Jerusalem Bible. And I have here the 1917 Scofield Reference Edition, Holy Bible, Words of Christ in red letter. I also have I'm going to find the other one. I have the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, put out by the Jewish, a new translation of Holy Scriptures according to the traditional Hebrew texts. I have a third Bible. I don't know where it is, in here somewhere. And then I have books like Horizontal Line, Synopsis of the Gospels. And then you have books like Old Testament since the Reformation. It's good to know the history of biblical interpretation, how the Old Testament was, for example, understood since the Reformation. This is put out by Emma A. Crowling. Then you have The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark. And then you have New Testament, A Guide to the New Testament World by Albert A. Bell. And it's good to have Understanding of the Ancient Near East, Volume 1, an Anthology of Text and Pictures, Ancient. These are good to have when you're doing exegesis and preaching and teaching from the Old Testament. And then you have Barrett, the New Testament background. It's good to have a background of the New Testament, historical background. And then you have the Nang Hambrain Library, which was a library found around the 40s in Israel, looking at the ancient Old Testament texts preserved in scrolls. See, this is the Dead Sea Scrolls in English is important to have when you're studying the Old Testament and the New Testament. And then you have Interpretation of the New Testament, 1861 to 1961 by Stephen Nell. And then you have Layman's English-Greek Concordance by James Call. These are kind of books that you would have doing biblical exegesis on the Old and New Testament, just basic reference books, word studies that you would look at if you were doing biblical exegesis. What else do I have here? Index, Revised Greek Lexicon. What else I have? There's a Greek Hebrew grammar. Let me see. This is a linguistic key to the Greek New Testament. I used this when I was in seminary. It has the Greek, and then it gives you the English translation, the most important words. This is going on 24 minutes. I have another Greek English New Testament. These are the kind of books you have when you're doing biblical exegesis. I also have this, Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, abridged in one volume, looking at all the New Testament words, the most important ones, and giving you a theological and biblical understanding of them. I think that's it. Let me see here. Oh, here's that other third volume of the New Translation, Holy Scriptures. This is the Prophets, put out by the Jewish Publication Society of America. See, there's 3 volumes of this. I don't know where the other ones went. See, here's you have the prophets, the Torah, and the writings. This is put out by the Jewish Publication Society of America. This is good when you're doing Old Testament exegesis, to have how the Jewish or Hebrew is understood by Jews, I suppose. Well, I think this is it. A series I like on the Old Testament is Hershine. You have the world before the flood. And then you have the Exodus and the wanderings in the wilderness by Hershine. And then you have Israel and Joshua and the Judges by Hershine. History of Judah and Israel by Hershine. History of Judah and Israel by Hershine, Volume 2. Israel and Samuel, Saul, and David by Hershine. And so that's a good series to have when you're preaching through the Old Testament. So I think that's it. This is an old New Testament, New Standard. I had this for almost 50 years. When I was working back when I was in the early 20s, I worked in a steel factory at night, and I carried this around, and I read it. It's all underlined. Here's another Greek New Testament. This is the first Bible I used. It was given to me by my grandfather. It's a Revised Standard. Johnny Ray by his grandfather, Christmas 1963. Grandpa died May 13, 1968. This is the first Bible I used when I became a Christian in 1970. I was in the Jesus movement. You can see that. So you can see that. I was in the Jesus movement. I still have stuff from the Jesus movement in here. Yeah, I was a Jesus freak back there in Berkeley in the 70s. And so this is the first Bible I used when I became a Christian. It's all marked up and has all kinds of notes in it. Yeah. So I'll sign off, give you a rough idea of what it means to do biblical exegesis, kind of books that you can use when you're going preaching and teaching through the Old Testament and New Testament. Looking at the Hebrew, looking at the Greek, doing exegesis, word studies, theological studies of the words, using concordances and all these different tools. So I hope this will give you an idea, at least a small idea of kind of books that you can collect if you're into this kind of thing. And so I'll sign off. Today is the Sunday. It's June the 30th. It's the last day of June. It's Sunday afternoon. I've been very busy. Our family's been visiting our son and his family from Linden, and our daughter and her family from Denver, and our oldest son, his family lived down the street. So it's been a really great time spending it with our family, seeing our grandchildren, eating, talking, and just having a good time. And I hope you all have a good new week, a new month. We're going into the month of July. And I'll sign off. I hope this was somewhat useful, give you an idea about biblical exegesis. And yeah, so I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for the new subscribers. Do pray that you have a good new week, reading week, and may the Lord bless. Bye.